People's Business is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Business in the aftermath of the tropical storm Brett. Now, as we reflect on the impact of Brett and look forward to plans for the 2023 Atlantic season, we're joined by a panel of experts who will help us understand the potential financial, medical, social, and cultural impact on Barbados as a small island developing state and the Caribbean as a whole. Our first guest is Kerry Hinds, the Director of the Department of Emergency Management. Also joining us this evening is Dr. Ramona Archer-Bradshaw, Chief Education Officer, and she also doubles as Chief Shelter Warden. Also with us is Elizabeth Riley, the Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, or SEDEMA, who will provide insight into the long-term recovery efforts and the strategies being implemented to try and mitigate the impact of future disasters. And finally, we have Acting Senior Superintendent Rodney Archer, who will discuss the role of law enforcement in disaster management and the challenges faced in maintaining public safety during these times of crisis. We'll have that and more coming up on tonight's discussion. That's all after the break. Of course, we'll invite you to be a part of the discussion by coming through with your queries and comments on 228-5562 and 228-5563. The People's Business, taking a look at where we are during storm season, coming up next. Good evening and welcome back to the People's Business. This evening we're asking the question, are we indeed storm ready? Now you'd know that we had Tropical Storm Brett impact Barbados over the last few days, specifically on Thursday, Wednesday evening into Thursday, and we felt a little bit of it into Friday. So this discussion will center a bit on that, and then of course we are going to move forward with looking at how we are working to make sure that we are in fact storm ready here in Barbados and across the region. Now, Acting Prime Minister Teshia Bradshaw, along with other officials, toured some of the impacted areas after Brett had passed, and when CBC caught up with her, this is what she had to say.
We are actually now on the ground. The assessors are out and they are trying to ensure that they get to as many of the persons. There are about 13 households that we'd identified that they had some challenges with their houses, whether they'd lost the roofs or in some cases there was damage to the actual physical structure. So those assessors are actually talking to the families to do an assessment so that we know how to place them, how to assist them in whatever ways. Accommodation will obviously be provided for persons who have been displaced.
All right, so bringing us up to speed on a few of the things that happened coming out of Tropic Storm Brett. Let's start with you, Kerry Hinds. Bring us up to speed on what has happened post Brett, maybe an overall assessment of damage, what has happened, what we're looking to do now that that particular system has passed.
Thanks very much for the question. Good night, Barbados. Good night to the panel. Um, with respect to after the passing of Tropical Storm Brett, we have been carrying out our damage assessment. Based on what we see, we had about 70 or just over 70 reports of some type of damage, whether that be fallen trees, instances with the electricity poles, and of course the damage to homes. As the acting Prime Minister has said, we had to date we had 13 instances of damage to homes. The assessors were out in the field, our damage assessors. They have been out of the field since Friday, assessing the damage and trying to have a good feel in terms of what are the needs after the impact. We also have a number of crews out in the field just trying to effect the necessary repairs. So persons will see the Barbados Light and Power. We have our roving response team there dealing with any fallen trees, and a number of other agencies are out. With respect to the damage to the homes, after carrying out that damage assessment, then we would see what is required, whether that be placement in temporary shelter and or, of course, retrofitting to the homes that require such.
All right, well, thank you. Elizabeth Riley, to get a view of what happened down the region, with the passage of Tropical Storm Brett, are you in a position to tell us, how other Caribbean islands were preparing for or fared as Brett has been making its way across the region?
Certainly. Good evening, Teshia, and good evening to the members of the panel and to the Barbadian public. So 4 of the city participating states were under threat from Tropical Storm Brett: Barbados, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Lucia. I'm happy to say that we saw national emergency management systems being activated and proactively treating the preparedness actions ahead of Tropical Storm Brett. And I think the participating states and the National Disaster Coordinator should be commended for this. With respect to the impacts that we saw, Barbados and Dominica had very minimal impacts, as you heard from Ms. Hinds, and of course, in both countries, assessments are still ongoing because this is a part of the operational procedures to ensure that any damage that is incurred is still recorded, and we do need to assist those persons in the population who may have been affected. With respect to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and St. Lucia, we do have initial information in at the coordinating unit. The damage assessment processes are still ongoing in these countries, but I can share that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there was some measure of disruption to electrical supply, with about 50% of the Vinlet customers being out of service as a result of the passage of Brett. There was also significant storm surge impacts, particularly on the northeastern coast of St. Vincent in the areas of Owea and Fancy. And there was some damage to housing as a result of the significant storm surge in those areas. St. Vincent and the Grenadines also reported some damage to the agricultural sector, but the assessments are ongoing. And so I think in a few days we will get a better sense of the actual quantification. Over in St. Lucia, there were also some impacts with respect to electricity. Again, 60% of the customers were out of service, and Lucilette was working assiduously to restore that service to customers. There was some disruption with respect to water supply as well, and the efforts were ongoing to restore that service to customers. With respect to housing damage, up to Friday evening, there were approximately 35 homes that had reported damage, but of course the assessments were ongoing and we anticipate that that number may go up a little bit. And of course, to the agricultural sector, particularly the banana farms and banana plantations, they suffered significant impacts, and the Ministry of Agriculture is in the process of quantifying those losses.
All right, not too significant, but definitely some stuff to note that we will touch on as we go through this evening's discussion. I want to go now to you, Dr. Archer-Bradshaw, to take a look at, now we heard Ms. Hinds talk about, and we heard through the news that there were a few people who did seek shelter. So if we can touch on that a little bit, how many people, if any, had to be sheltered, and how things worked for the shelters this time around.
Okay, thank you for the question. Good evening, Teshia. Good evening, panelists. Good evening, Barbados. We had 40 shelterees. Of those shelterees, 25 were male and 15 were female. The systems that we had put in place all worked satisfactorily. We will have a debriefing on Monday to discuss how we can better approach how we admit these persons to the shelter and collect the information that we need as these persons come into the shelter. But I must say the level of preparation that we had was quite high. From the moment that we heard that Barbados would have been affected by Tropical Storm Brett, we put all of the systems in place. We had the shelter coordinators alerted. We had the shelter wardens alerted. We coordinated with the Ministry of Housing in terms of erecting shutters. So I must say that we were 95% ready with regard to Tropical Storm Brett.
Your other hat as Chief Education Officer, some will argue that it always seems a little delayed in making a decision as to whether the children should come out of school early, whether they should go in based on the weather when we have these systems approaching Barbados. What's the plan generally about what we do based on the children going into school or leaving school early and things of that nature?
That's an excellent question. These decisions are made based on the science. So before we can decide whether we will close school, we have to hear from the Met Office, we have to hear from the Minister of Home Affairs, and we have to hear from the Prime Minister. Not to mention that there must be discussion with all other relevant stakeholders before the decision is made with regard to how school will proceed. It is not a case where the Ministry of Education will just say no school or there is school. We have to base our decisions on science each and every time and ensure that the relevant parties have been notified and that there has been discussion, and then we'll make the announcement to the public.
Now, Dr. Archer-Bradshaw, now you're here. I hope the other guests don't get jealous, but I have quite a few questions that I need to level with you first before we kind of level things out. But I know on Friday, just after we got the all clear, which was just after 6 o'clock, we knew that was a day for CAPE exams. So a number of students had to go into school. There was a half-hour delay in allowing them to get to various sites. We also heard that they would have been accommodated at different examination centers. Were there any known disruptions to the examinations based on the passage of the tropical storm?
No, not to the best of my knowledge. Everything rolled out smoothly. As I had shared on the Friday, we put a number of plans in place because we knew that there was a possibility that the all clear may have been given after the scheduled exam time. We also knew that it could have been given a few hours before the exam time. So we planned for each of those possibilities. So when the all clear was given early enough, we were able to roll out the plan, which we stated very clearly. We said that the students do not have to go to their respective centers to write the exam. We made accommodation for them at centers that are close to their homes or close to where they're located, close to the exam time. So all of that was planned ahead and we successfully rolled out. I was actually able to pass by one of the centers on the Friday, and I saw that there were a number of children from different schools at that center. So I have not had any negative reports with regard to our children writing the examination.
All right, that's excellent news. Now, Acting Senior Superintendent Rodney Archer, usually when we look at law enforcement, a lot of people see you kind of down one road. So explain to us what the role of law enforcement is and the role that you play in disaster management and how you sort of balance the need for public safety with the need to provide aid to affected communities.
Good evening, Barbados. Good evening, other members of the panel and hosts.
Good evening.
Now, our role in law enforcement as it relates to disaster management is to ensure the safety of persons. Our primary objective is safety. So we do everything to facilitate that process. And ours, as it relates to disaster management, especially in the event of a hurricane, starts way before that weather system impacts us. We know that Barbadians are very late in things like shopping, so we have to facilitate the rush, and it would involve some kind of traffic management plan, and we seek to make sure that there is a easy flow of traffic to and from. We try to educate, along with the Department of Emergency Management, we try to educate persons about safety and the need to get off the road when the system impacts. But even before then, we encourage persons who are not in safe environments to seek shelter in the various shelters. But I would think that one of our failures and the need to go a step further is in the case of education, persuasive education. We need to further encourage those persons that are not in safe environments, whose homes are not in the best of shape, to come out of those homes, to go into the shelter. We know that persons are attached to their homes, they're attached to their pets, and there's this sentimental attachment. But we need to further encourage persons to be safe. It is all about safety. We want to bring you to a position of safety. And luckily in this instance, there was no loss of life, or there were no reports of injury. So our job, I would think, in this instance was a success.
All right, absolutely. Big panel tonight, but we also want you to get in here with your questions and comments as well. Remember, you can call us on 228-5562 and 228-5563. We're going to bring some of your questions in during the next break, and we're going to continue our discussion with our panel of experts as we reflect on Tropical System Brett and really ask the question if we truly are storm ready. Stay with us. in how we have shaped our current preparedness plans. So in other words, how they influenced what we do now as opposed to what we would have done, say, last year?
Thanks very much for the question. The emergency management system continually evolves. Um, as we go through various systems from year to year, various emergencies from year to year, we tend to refine. It's a time for us to review and refine our plans and our policies. So, for example, just taking us back through at the time of COVID, when we were at the height of the pandemic, our plans at that point in time would reflect the implications of COVID, which we did not have before. So, for example, in terms of um, how we dealt with the shelters and how we house persons within the shelters, we took into consideration certain things as it related to a pandemic. So, as you go through systems, even in terms of how the first responders how they responded, the level of personal protective equipment that they would use, that was adjusted during the height of COVID. Also, in terms of increased use of technology. So, for example, where we would have face-to-face EOCs, we had to update our plans in such a way to facilitate virtual EOCs as well, or some aspects of that information technology. Take, for instance, how we do damage assessment. The integration now of increased use of technology is one of the aspects that we see in terms of the refinement of and procedures. So we use a lot of the drone technology now to facilitate that damage assessment process so we can get a better situational awareness. So those are just some key examples, but as we evolve as a system, it is important that we review what we are doing as we go along and look to refine so we can better respond to the eventualities.
Speaking of as you go along, I know the initial assessment is over, as you mentioned, when we spoke with the representative from the BDF. They told us that the drone technology really helped them to be able to make that assessment quickly, to move us to a state where we were able to give the all clear, in a more timely manner and things like that. So following that assessment, and I know it usually is ongoing, because even after you've done the initial assessment, then there will be other instances popping up or people coming forward. Did you have to shelter and get shelter for anyone post-Brett? And if so, how many people and where?
In terms of just to clarify, do you mean in terms of the shelters, we would have housed persons within the shelters?
No, I mean, no, to clarify for you, I mean, after that, based on the assessment, we saw the acting prime minister saying that, a number of people had damage to their roofs and so on. So were there individuals who you had to find shelter for after the storm had passed based on the damage that was done to their properties?
Yes, we had about 3 or so individuals that we definitely having some level of temporary shelter for until we retrofit their homes. That was at a minimum. We had 1 or 2 structures which were definitely impacted in such a way that the persons cannot reside in those particular areas. So we have our various social services and our welfare agencies focusing in on ensuring that those persons are taken care of in the interim.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, moving moving back to Elizabeth Riley, let's examine some of the strategies that are being implemented to really mitigate the impact of weather systems on the countries of the region. You know, every year we have these systems coming through, but there most certainly must be some best practices that are being put in place in some of our neighboring countries that we can adapt, and vice versa. There must be some practices here in Barbados that we can share down the region to try to mitigate that impact, so that it doesn't always seem as though we are being reactive, but we're being more proactive to these systems that we know are coming every year.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Teshia. And it's such an important question. And I want to start by touching first of all on what's happening with the hazards, because with respect to the hydrometeorological hazards, climate change is significantly making the scene a lot more complicated. So I know members of the population follow the discussions on climate change, and they hear on the news programs about the warming sea surface temperatures and the potential for stronger storms, more intense rainfall, more frequent and extensive drought, and we've been living that. So I wanted to put that into context, because even as we strive towards maintaining the 1.5 to stay alive mantra, which was the small island states slogan going into the discussions in Paris at the Conference of Parties, we are also acutely aware that the rate at which the mitigation measures are being taken to reduce the causes of climate change, it is not happening at a rate which will likely allow us to stay within that 1.5 degrees. And what it means is that there's going to be a lot more uncertainty with respect to the systems, not just the big cyclonic systems, but also smaller severe weather events, which are causing a lot of challenges. And we saw those in St. Vincent and Dominica just last November. But what it means is that we have to work more with our scientists to get a better understanding of the risk associated with these systems. And we're also doing a lot of work on, yes, trying to mitigate the implications. So, for example, the SEDIMA coordinating unit is right now engaged in an initiative, which I think is a real game-changing initiative, looking at revisiting the code of practice for the construction of small homes and making them built to a capability of resisting category 5 strength winds and also 7.5 on the Richter scale earthquakes. And we're doing this in collaboration with CrossQ, the Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, as well as the Caribbean Development Bank, the OECS, and a number of other partners. And this has already been integrated as a critical component of the Caribbean vocational qualification through our partnership with CANTA. And this is important because it means that this type of information, knowledge about how to build and build in a resilient way is going to be available to artisans through our regional technical and vocational institutions, community colleges, polytechnics, etc. In addition, there's a lot that is happening in terms of the areas of early warning. We've been working a lot with our regional partners, including the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, to get a better understanding of the dynamics of these systems, potential impacts, and how do we keep our population safe. So there's quite a bit being done in terms of modeling work at the CIMH. We get very robust and accurate forecasting with respect to potential precipitation, storm surge, open water wave height. So there's a lot of analysis that goes into the systems that are potentially impacting us and ensuring that we're able to apply that knowledge to inform our actions to keep the population safe. And just to mention a third area, we also are doing quite
seems as though
investing a lot in building the capacity of our states to recover from hazard events and developing recovery frameworks so that countries can start to plan on how recovery will happen even before the event takes place. So these are just some of the examples of the work we're doing at the coordinating unit, and this is just really a tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that's being done by the team in collaboration with our participating states and partners.
Well, definitely a mouthful, a lot to sift through. So I know, it's a year-round thing in terms of just really trying to create that plan and make it fit for purpose as we move from year to year. I understand we have a caller on the line, so let's go ahead and take that call. Good evening. Welcome to the People's Business.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, sir. Go right ahead with your
Okay,
question or comment.
right. I want to say hi to the panel, and my question today basically has to do with public transport, right? It relates to the disaster and how is it being done in terms of when the call is made for public transport to cease. Because my concern is that as the chairman of the association, I repeatedly call on the disaster management to include the association in the decision making, because normally when we heard about the country being shut down because of the upcoming hurricane, it also created an issue for us generally as the public transport operators. We have to get in touch with the public, with the operators out there to let them know that they need to be off the road by a certain time. I remember some year or two ago, we have had an issue, particularly in Spiceton, where the country was shut down for 3 o'clock, and by 10 o'clock, most of our operators went off the road by, particularly in the north. So I am calling basically, and I repeat this call again, I'm calling that whatever decision is taken, and that we as public service operators, we have over 800 PSVs on the road, and we have a right to know early so we can inform our members. And I'm very concerned, and I'm hoping that we could be included in some level of discussion when they come in to take our public service vehicles off the road.
All right, thank you so much for your contribution. I'm wondering if you can take that particular comment, Ms. Hinds.
Thanks so much for the question, and I acknowledge the concern of the public service vehicles in terms of being a part of the discussion. Usually once we anticipate or discuss the whole issue of the national shutdown, there are a number of stakeholders who we pull in to have that discussion, because it is a very important, we need to get it right in terms of gradually shutting down the country if there is a need to. I will ensure that we do engage that particular sector, because it is very important. We need to get persons off of the road quickly and safely. And we do acknowledge that in addition to the main transport board that are public service vehicles, minibuses and what's not, they are also an integral partner as we seek to transport persons to safety back to their homes.
All right, well, thank you so much. I'm being told that was Roy Raphael, head of the Alliance of Owners of Public Transport. So again, thanks to that caller, Mr. Roy Raphael, for your contribution. We're going to take another break and come on back. When we come back, I have a question for the Chief Education Officer, and you can think about this during the break. Usually during these times, sometimes with systems, we lose some time at school. So I'm wondering if there is a system in place, a part of the plan to ensure that the children in missing school for rain days and days where we're impacted affected by wildfires and other disasters, if there's a plan in place to ensure that the children aren't losing time in the classroom when they're out of the classroom. So that's all coming up after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to the People's Business. This evening, we're asking the question, are we indeed storm ready? But it's not a one-way street when it comes to looking at matters of disasters, natural disasters here in the Caribbean, and more certainly as a small island, developing states. There are a number of things we're susceptible to. And throughout the year, we've seen a number of bushfires, as we often do around this time of year. We've had some concerns at various schools to do with environmental concerns of another nature and so on. So we have the Chief Education Officer with us, and I'm just wondering how we ensure that students don't fall behind academically due to missed days of school when it comes to weather storms or other environmental concerns.
Okay, where possible, we encourage the use of the online facility. You will be well aware that during the COVID-19 pandemic, many of our children were issued with devices, and we encourage our students and our teachers to use that same online facility. There's a Google Classroom platform that can be used. Now, you would appreciate also that there are some instances that will not allow for the use of technology. For example, on Friday, when we had the high winds and the rain and so on, there were some down power lines, and of course, some teachers and students would have been affected by that as well. So what I would say at this point is that we do encourage the use of the online facility. We encourage teachers and students to conduct their classes and engage in classes online.
Do your preparedness plans also factor in the possibility of having to shelter students at school if we have, any systems that approach without too much notice?
Very often, Teshia, we get enough notice. I can tell you that the Met Office shares the information readily, and quite often as they get the information, that information informs how we proceed with regard to sheltering students. I cannot recall any time in recent history where students were stranded at school because of an impending system. I heard Kerry speak earlier about the use of technology And I know that over the years, the technology has been quite good in predicting the kind of storm that we will have, the intensity of the storm, and the timing of the storm. And we heavily rely on that technology to make decisions when it comes to our students and our staff. Now, for the system that occurred recently, where we had some shelterees that were of school age. The oldest shelteree we had was 84 years old. And as I said, some were school children. But in terms of planning for a system that just springs on us suddenly, we do not have that plan in place. But of course, it doesn't mean that we can't put something like that in place. But I can say that given the advancements in technology, that we are in a pretty good place in terms of our warning systems.
Absolutely. And I mean, with climate change causing, so many more systems, intense hurricanes, these days we're seeing some things that we never even thought we could see in Barbados. Just a few years ago, we heard about what seemed to be mini tornadoes and things like that. I want to go back now to Acting Superintendent Rodney Archer. And my question to you is, and I'm not sure that I've ever heard this, but have you found that some criminals take the opportunity when we have these shutdowns to maybe try to capitalize on people not being in specific areas like Bridgetown or commercial areas and things of that nature?
Thanks for the question. And I'm surprised that you have not heard this, but it is a reality. Criminals take the opportunity when systems, hurricanes, storms strike, when they know that the commercial centers are battered down and unprotected, left virtually unprotected, to plan criminal activity. But I can assure you, despite the fact that it increases the danger to police officers' lives to have to respond in an actual system, we have plans in place to respond when such things occur. But I can tell you that it is something that we have planned for. We have units in place on standby to respond to such things as looting. I believe you may have been referring specifically to looting. And we have units specifically chosen and at the ready to respond to any reports of looting during an active system. So it is a common occurrence in the criminal world. It is not as common in Barbados, but we are very aware of it. And the store owners can feel safe and assured that the Barbados Police Service is at the ready to respond to those kinds of occurrences.
Oh, absolutely. And I most certainly have not heard about them occurring with the frequency, the level of frequency that you just shared, but it always is good to know. And we tell people about preparing, but we often don't think about that side of preparation. Now, Ms. Riley, what message would you like to send to the international community regarding the impact of tropical systems on SIDS like Barbados and the rest of islands across the region, and in relation to what support is needed to ensure successful recovery as we continue to amplify our voices across the world stage through our own Prime Minister, Mia Motley, traveling across the world, certainly sharing the Bridgetown initiative, which includes a lot of what we're working toward, which is looking at financing for small island states based on different factors. What role can they truly play in the successful recovery of SIDS?
Yeah, that's a great question, Teshia. And I think the first point I want to make is that The role of the international partners is a supportive one and a complementary one. And it is really important for partners who work within the Caribbean community to work within the strategic direction that has been set by the political leadership of the region and supported by the regional agencies. And I think a lot of our partners have certainly come on board. Certainly from a SEDIMA perspective, we have a regional strategy for comprehensive disaster management, and the partners who work with us on building resilience to the hazards have definitely plugged into this. The other thing I would say is that we have to work on strengthening the capacity within the small island states. So we know that there are constraints which face us by virtue of being small. We have limited but often highly skilled human resources. We have limitations with respect to the assets that are in place, certainly for supporting emergency response. And it is important that the support from the international community really comes in a complementary way and seeks to strengthen our own capacity for doing things for ourselves. And I think this point is even more important in the context of climate change, because if we look at what has been happening across the globe, climate change is indeed an existential threat for us as small states and really threatens our own existence. But we're noticing that the implications of hydrometeorological hazards are across the globe. And there will come a point, I believe, when many of our development partners who traditionally support us will start to have a more inward and domestic look because of the implications of these climate impacts. And I think if we look at instances of, for example, unprecedented flooding across Europe, Canada, United States, droughts and wildfires in Australia, California, etc., you'll realize that the climate crisis is also commanding a lot of domestic attention. So this is something that we have to look at as well. And then my final point is really about the financial resources. And this is very much in keeping with the cry that has been made by the Honorable Prime Minister Mia Amor-Motley in the global space, because of course we want to see fairness with respect to the financial resources that are available to small states. We know that there are criteria right now that are applied which do not correlate with the level of vulnerability that's faced by our small states. And continuation of providing financial resources to complement national level resources in addressing these issues is also going to be important.
All right, lots to really digest, and we're going to go to break quickly, but from you, Kerry, I know that for regional governments, and most certainly here in Barbados, and particularly post-COVID, regional governments really have to try to balance the need for economic development with the need to protect vulnerable communities from the impacts of things like climate change and natural disasters and even storms and so on, things of that nature. So what impact, if any, has that had on your ability to ably respond to what is truly needed? Because, you know, there are limitations to everything. So we know that you might have your ideal wish list or your ideal plan, but in the grand scheme of things, then you might have to kind of pick and choose. So, you know, how are we kind of balancing the two, the need to protect the most vulnerable amongst us and the need to continue on that plan of global, of enfranchisement economically, or economic development?
Teshia, it is about partnerships and collaboration and leveraging the resources across the system. As you quite rightly said, you usually have a plan and it entails the resources that you would love to have. to ensure that you can service your clients and the extended public, as well as your first responders and the entire system as a whole. But what we have found ourselves in a position where we need to ensure that we broker new partnerships with persons within the national space. So that may be private sector entities, non-governmental organizations. And we also reach out to our regional partners and our international partners. Again, it is about leveraging the resources that we have and bringing those partners and resources to the table so that we can service the community we need. It is a balancing act, but it is one that we basically do every day. Being a part of the SEDIMA system, we are able to leverage a lot of technical assistance um, from our regional, from the regional countries within the region, and also from the international space, bringing, it could be as much as the response equipment that can augment what we have here in Barbados. It can be a case of technology transfer to support our various systems here in times of response and times of readiness as well. So it really, as you quite rightly said, it really is a balancing act. But I think it is also about ensuring that we are at the table with our traditional as well as new partners, and we leverage the resources that um, all these partners will have to ensure that we are in a state of readiness and we can respond to the various issues that we have as a country.
I'm glad that you ended your statement there on being in a state of readiness, because as we go to this final break, I'd like each of you to think about what our response mechanism was like for Tropical Storm Brett, and if there are any areas that you feel like we need to tweak as we move forward. So that's how we'll close out this evening's presentation. Do stay with us. All right, it always feels like the time goes by too quickly. I'm going to give each of the panelists just a few seconds to be able to wrap up this final question as we close out, kind of round out this evening's discussion. And we're going to start with you, Dr. Archer-Bradshaw. What did we do right? What can we do better?
I thought that the communication between the shelter coordinators, these are the education officers responsible for the wardens, along with the communication between the wardens and myself, that was excellent. Of course, we will meet tomorrow, as I said, and we will debrief to see what other areas we can improve. But I think that persons need to find out which shelters are closest to them. They need to walk with their ID cards and walk with their food.
All right, and on to the acting superintendent. Same question to you. What did we do right? What can we do better? I believe your microphone is off, sir. You are muted. If you can unmute your device. In the interim, we're going to take in the response from Ms. Riley.
Yes,
from the Caribbean perspective.
Yes, certainly. I think the regional system worked quite well for Tropical Storm Brett. I thought the early warning systems were on point. We were proactive and I think also able to respond quickly to requests. SEDIMA responded to requests for specific items from both Dominica as well as St. Lucia. And we were also able to provide support on the emergency telecom side. In fact, our team is still there assisting with a few matters. What do we need to do better? I think we've seen improvements in the national damage assessment systems. I think that is a machinery that we will need to continue to oil because the timely information coming through in the aftermath is really important. And finally, it's important to do the after action reviews because this really points us to the areas where we have done well, but also gaps that need improvement.
All right, excellent. Let me see if the acting superintendent is back with us. Oh, we've unfortunately still lost his audio. So, Ms. Hinds, the final word then is yours.
In terms of our response to Tropical Storm Brett, I thought it went well. As usual, we will go back and have our debriefing or hot wash, as we call it, and our after action, so we can see what, if there were any things that we needed to tweak. I felt that one of the areas we have to ensure that we're always on top of is timely decision making. And in order to ensure that there's timely decision making, we have to ensure that we have the information available to us to respond as needs be. The teamwork, the collaboration went well over the two days that we were in the National Emergency Operations Center. And I say kudos and thanks to all the partners that were a part, including the media, who was there to ensure that the information, we always had that line of communication open with the public and ensuring that the public was well aware of what was going on.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, all of us. Unfortunately, we lost the audio there for the acting superintendent at the end, but I'd like to thank all of you for coming in and sharing with us, and of course to you for tuning in to The People's Business. On behalf of the entire team, I'm Teshia Hinds, wishing you a wonderful week ahead.